Chapter 1. The Whisper of a Mark. The forest floor was a soft carpet of pine needles and secrets. Lyra Vale moved through the ancient woods like a ghost, her steps making no sound. A thick, herbal charm dangled from her leather belt, its pungent scent of wolfsbane and moonpetal a clever lie. It screamed human to any passing shifter, a bitter perfume that masked the sweet, rain-touched truth of her omega nature. She knelt beside the fallen wolf, its gray fur matted with blood and mud. Its breath came in shallow, ragged puffs of mist in the cool air. This was the third one this season she'd found near the edges of her territory, astray, wounded, and left for dead. But this one was different. Her fingers, stained with the green of crushed herbs, gently probed the deep gash along the creature's flank. The wolf whined, a low, pathetic sound that vibrated through the ground. "Shh. Easy now," she murmured, her voice a low hum that was more for herself than for the animal. She worked with a calm that felt like a shield. Strength, detachment. These were the walls she had built around the hollow space in her chest, where a pack bond used to be. Inside, her own wolf whimpered in sympathy, but Lyra silenced it. Pity was a luxury she'd discarded years ago, right alongside hope. She ground a poultice in a small stone bowl, the motions practiced and sure. She was a rogue healer, a whisper in the wildlands, powerful in her own right. She didn't need a pack. She didn't need an alpha. And she certainly didn't need the fates who had once dangled a perfect life in front of her, only to snatch it away with a single brutal word: reject. The memory was a phantom limb, an ache that never truly faded. She pushed it down, because focusing on the pain was a weakness she could no longer afford. She was better off alone. Safer. Her world was small, but it was hers to control. As she worked, she caught the faint scent of wood smoke on the wind, carrying with it the hushed tones of travelers passing on the old road miles away. Their words were fragmented, little more than anxious murmurs. "The moon's chosen," a man's voice worried. A woman's followed, thin and reedy. "Will be revealed at the gathering, a new era." Lyra's hand stilled for a fraction of a second. She'd heard the rumors, of course, whispers of a great prophecy of an Omega who would rise with the moon's own power to unite the packs. A fairy tale, a foolish hope for the broken and the lost. It had nothing to do with her. She was a healer of flesh and bone, not of fractured alliances and dying traditions. Finished with her work, she cleaned her hands on a damp cloth, her gaze lingering on the now sleeping wolf. A strange marking, like a crescent moon with a slash through it, was tattooed just inside its ear. An old clan sigil? She'd never seen it before. A shiver, cold and unwelcome, traced a path down her spine. The feeling of being watched settled over her, but the forest was empty, quiet, too quiet. She dismissed the feeling and stood up, her duty done. The wolf would live, it would move on, and she would remain. That was the rhythm of her life. Fix what was broken, then watch it leave. She turned to head back to her small hidden cabin as the last rays of sun bled through the canopy, painting the forest in hues of orange and deep violet. But then a sudden, sharp sting erupted on her wrist. She gasped, dropping her satchel. She looked down, her heart starting to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. There, on the pale skin of her inner wrist, a faint, silvery light was beginning to glow. It wasn't a burn. It wasn't a cut. It was a pattern, intricate as a snowflake, and ancient as the stars, etching itself into her skin. It pulsed with a soft, ethereal light, a call she hadn't heard in years. No, it couldn't be. She stared, her breath catching in her throat as the symbol swirled into its final shape. A glowing mark, a summons from the very magic she'd tried so hard to forget. The moon was calling her name, and she knew with a terrifying certainty that her carefully constructed piece was about to be shattered. Chapter 2. The Echo of a Face. The following morning, the glowing mark had faded to a faint, silvery shimmer, like a scar made of moonlight. Lyra had spent the night restless, her wolf pacing the cage of her mind, agitated by the symbol branded on her skin. She told herself it was a trick of the light, a strange reaction to an herb. But she was a terrible liar, especially to herself. She was trimming lavender by her cabin door when the scent reached her. Not the familiar aroma of the forest, but the crisp, formal smell of pack warriors. Clean leather, polished steel, and the underlying scent of authority. Two figures emerged from the tree line, their gray and silver emissary cloaks marking them as envoys of the High Council. They moved with a purpose that made the hairs on her arms stand up. "Lyra Vale?" the taller one asked, his voice devoid of warmth. His eyes swept over her small cabin, her herb gardens, and her, his expression a mask of faint disdain. He held out a rolled parchment, sealed with the silver wax of the council. "You are summoned." Lyra didn't move to take it. She crossed her arms, the shears in her hand feeling suddenly heavy, suddenly like a weapon. "I don't answer summons," she said, her voice flat. "I am a rogue. The council has no authority here." This was her sanctuary, the one place she was free from the laws and hierarchies that had tried to crush her. They would not drag her back, they couldn't. The second emissary, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, stepped forward. "The moon goddess has begun her call," she explained, her tone a little softer, though no less firm. "All unmated Omegas of notable lineage are required to attend the moon gathering. It is not a request." Her gaze flickered to Lyra's wrist, and Lyra instinctively pulled her sleeve down to cover the faint mark. Too late. The woman's eyes widened slightly. She knew. Rage, hot and familiar, coiled in Lyra's stomach. "Notable lineage?" she scoffed, the sound bitter. "The last I checked, my lineage ended with a public rejection. Or did the council forget that detail?" She hated the tremor in her voice, hated that these strangers could so easily peel back the scab on her oldest wound. Her goal was simple, to make them leave. She wanted to retreat back into the quiet hum of her life, where the only expectations were the ones she set for herself. "We have not forgotten," the man said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "But destiny does not care for past grievances. You will come." "No." The word was final. She turned her back on them, a clear dismissal. But as she did, a whisper echoed in her mind, not her own thought, but the voice of the wolf within her, raw and insistent. "You can't run from fate. You tried. Look where it got us, alone." The truth of it struck her with the force of a physical blow. She was strong, yes, independent, but she was so alone. Could she truly spend the rest of her life hiding? Her hand trembled as she reached out and took the parchment. The moment her fingers brushed against the silver seal, the world dissolved into a blinding flash of white. It wasn't a memory. It was a vision, sharp and painfully real. A face. A man's face carved from granite and shadows, with eyes the color of a stormy sky. His lips were pressed into a hard line, his jaw clenched with a familiar, arrogant pride. She saw his eyes, cold as a winter frost. She felt his presence, a weight that stole the air from her lungs. She remembered his voice, a cruel whip that had lashed her heart to ribbons. Ronan. The vision shattered as quickly as it came, leaving her gasping, clutching the summons so tightly her knuckles were white. The moon symbol wasn't just a general call. It was a thread, and the vision had just shown her the face of the man waiting at the other end. Fate wasn't just calling her back. It was throwing her directly into the path of the one person who had ever broken her. Chapter 3. The Prison of Pride. Miles away, in a chamber built of dark wood and cold stone, Alpha Ronan Blackwell stared at an identical summons on his desk. The silver seal seemed to mock him, a glinting eye that knew all his secrets. He was the Alpha of the Crescent Holopack, a title he wore like armor. His authority was absolute. His commands followed without question. He was feared, respected, and his control over his territory was legendary. But it was all a carefully constructed lie, because the one thing he couldn't control was the gnawing sickness that was slowly killing his wolf. He ran a hand over his face, a wave of dizziness washing over him. A sharp, burning pain flared in his chest, right over his heart. It was him. Kale. His wolf. For years, Kale had been a silent, miserable passenger in his soul, a constant, aching reminder of his greatest failure. Ever since that day, the day he'd stood before his pack and uttered the word that had severed a sacred bond, his wolf had been fading. The rejection had poisoned them both. Now, Kale was little more than a whisper of agony, a phantom growl that only surfaced in his nightmares. Alpha? His beta, Elias, stood in the doorway, holding a stack of patrol reports. The scouts from the northern border have returned. Ronan didn't look up. Leave them, he commanded, his voice a low growl that held more weariness than threat. He wanted nothing more than to maintain his image of unshakable dominance, to hide the suffering that clawed at him from the inside. Love was weakness. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. He had chosen duty over destiny, strength over a mate bond, because that's what a true alpha does. He protects his pack, no matter the cost. Hadn't it been the right choice? Why then did it feel like he was rotting from the inside out? Elias hesitated, his loyalty warring with his concern. Ronan, you look pale. Kale, is he? He is fine, Ronan snapped, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. He slammed his hand on the desk, the sound echoing in the silent room. The sudden movement sent another spike of pain through his chest, and he clenched his jaw to keep from crying out. Elias saw it. He saw the flicker of torment in his alpha's eyes before the mask of cold command slammed back into place. This was his prison, a cage of his own making, built from pride and haunted by guilt. Kale's constant pain was fate's punishment, a daily reminder that some wounds could never heal. He finally picked up the summons, his fingers tracing the silver seal. An order, not a request. The High Council demanded his presence at the moon gathering to represent his pack. An honor, they called it. To him, it felt like a death sentence. His wolf, silent for so long, stirred with a sudden violent jolt of, what? Fear? Hope? Her? The wolf whimpered, the single thought so clear it was like a shout in his head. Ronan's blood ran cold. He knew who Kale meant. He knew who might be at that gathering. A ghost from a past he had tried to bury. He had to refuse. He had to find a way out of it. But he was an alpha bound by honor and law. He could not defy the council. He was being forced to walk into the one place in the world where he might see her again, the weak Omega he had cast aside. And the thought of looking into her eyes terrified him more than any blade or rival. Chapter 4. The Protector and the Heir. The moon gathering was held in a massive, open-air amphitheater carved from white stone, nestled in a valley that hummed with ancient magic. Torches flickered, their flames dancing like captured stars, casting long, dramatic shadows that twisted and writhed. The air was thick with anticipation, a heady mix of expensive perfumes, nervous shifter musk, and the metallic tang of old power. Hundreds of werewolves from dozens of packs filled the stone tiers, their fine silks and polished leathers a stark contrast to Lyra's simple, deep blue tunic. She had woven moon petal into the fabric, a trick to keep her scent muted, to keep her invisible. But the moment she stepped into the arena, she knew invisibility was no longer an option. A hush fell over the nearest sections. Whispers followed her like a ripple in a pond. Who is she? Look at her eyes, the color of the winter moon. She kept her chin high, her posture radiating a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Years of solitude had sharpened her edges, carving away the timid Omega she once was. She was no longer a girl who flinched at shadows. Now, she cast them. Her goal was simple. Endure this farce, let the moon choose some other poor soul, and then disappear back into the woods forever. She found a seat on a lower bench, away from the preening alphas and their giggling consorts. She could feel their eyes on her, their curiosity a palpable weight. It was annoying, but manageable. She was a stranger, an oddity. They would look, they would whisper, and then they would forget her. From across the arena, on a raised dais reserved for the most powerful alphas, Ronan Blackwell felt her presence before he saw her. It wasn't her scent. That was cleverly masked. It was a pull, a sudden, violent tug on his very soul. And then he saw her. She moved with a liquid grace that stole the air from his lungs. Her hair, the color of spun moonlight, was braided with wildflowers. She was radiant, unrecognizable. The broken, weeping girl he remembered was gone, replaced by a woman who looked like she could command the tides. And inside him, something shattered. Her. Kyle, his silent, dying wolf, roared to life, a sudden, explosive awakening after years of pained silence. The force of it knocked Ronan back a step, a gasp escaping his lips. His wolf clawed at the inside of his chest, desperate, howling her name over and over again in his mind. Lyra. Lyra. Mate. He was frozen, trapped between a tidal wave of guilt and a fierce primal surge of desire. It was impossible. It was a curse. He had rejected her because he thought she was weak, a liability his pack couldn't afford. But this woman was anything but weak. He watched as the full moon crested the lip of the valley, its pure white light flooding the amphitheater. The high priestess stepped into the center of the arena, her arms raised. Tonight, her voice boomed, magically amplified. The goddess chooses her heir. She chooses her protector, one soul to carry her light and one warrior to defend it. The moonlight intensified, coalescing into a single brilliant beam. It swept over the crowd, a divine spotlight searching for its star. It passed over hopeful she-wolves and proud alphas, ignoring them all. Lyra squeezed her eyes shut, her heart hammering against her ribs. Not me. Please, not me. But fate was a cruel beast with a twisted sense of humor. The beam of light stopped, hesitated, and then settled directly on her. It bathed her in a celestial glow, and the silver mark on her wrist ignited, burning with a light so bright it was visible to everyone. A collective gasp swept through the arena. But the moon wasn't finished. A second, smaller beam shot out from the first, a thread of pure light that snaked across the arena floor straight towards the Alpha's dais. It stopped directly in front of Ronan, illuminating his horrified face for all to see. The High Priestess's voice rang out, sealing their doom. The moon has chosen Lyra Vale, the heir of the moon, and Alpha Ronan Blackwell, her fated protector. Chapter 5. The dagger and the bond chaos erupted. The declaration hung in the air for a heartbeat, a perfect, crystalline moment of shock, before it shattered into 1,000 panicked shouts. Ronan was Lyra's protector? The very man who had publicly broken her? The irony was so thick it was suffocating. Lyra was on her feet, her mind reeling. This was a nightmare. This had to be a nightmare. Ronan stared at her from across the arena, his face a mask of disbelief and raw, naked yearning. His wolf was screaming, a triumphant, agonizing howl that only she could feel, a vibration deep in her bones. This bond. It was reawakening, and it was going to destroy them both. Before anyone could fully process the moon's impossible choice, they came from the shadows. Figures in black, their faces hidden by dark hoods, dropped from the upper tiers of the amphitheater. They moved with a silent, deadly grace, their blades glinting in the moonlight. Assassins, rogues. They ignored the powerful alphas, bypassed the pack warriors, and moved with a singular, terrifying purpose. They were coming for her. Her survival instincts, honed by years in the wild, screamed at her to run. She turned, ready to flee into the forest, but they were too fast. One was upon her in a blur, a wicked-looking dagger arcing towards her throat. She didn't have time to scream. She didn't have time to think, but she didn't need to. A black and gray missile of pure muscle and fury slammed into the assassin, sending him flying. Ronan. He was there, standing over her, his body a living shield. A low, guttural growl ripped from his chest, a sound so primal it shook the very stones beneath their feet. His eyes glowed with the golden light of his wolf, and for a second, he was not the cold, controlled alpha she remembered. He was a beast, driven by a singular, possessive need to protect what was his. "Get away from her," he snarled. Another assassin lunged from the side. Ronan moved to intercept, but a third came from behind. Lyra saw it a second before it happened. The flash of a poisoned blade, its tip dripping with a viscous black substance. "Ronan, look out!" she cried. He turned, but it was too late. The dagger plunged deep into his side. A strangled cry of pain escaped his lips, and he staggered, his hand flying to the wound. The black poison was already spreading, dark veins branching out from the gash across his skin. He was dying. The pack warriors were fighting now, a whirlwind of claws and teeth, but the damage was done. Without a second thought, Lyra dropped to her knees beside him. Her healer's instincts took over, eclipsing everything else. The shock, the fear, the bitter history between them. "The poison is ancient," she whispered, her hands hovering over the wound. "My herbs won't be fast enough." He was fading, his breathing growing shallow. She could feel his life slipping away, a cold tide pulling him under. There was only one way, a forbidden magic, a dangerous ritual that would either save him or kill them both. She pressed her palm against the wound and her other hand over his heart. Closing her eyes, she reached for the deepest part of her power, the raw, wild magic of the moon that now lived in her blood. She whispered the ancient words, and a silver light flowed from her hands into his body. It was a binding, a temporary mate link, forcing her life force into him, pushing back the poison by chaining their souls together. The world exploded in a flash of white light. His pain became her pain. His fear became her fear. Every beat of his weakening heart echoed in her own chest. The last thing she heard before darkness took her was the sound of his voice, a desperate whisper in her mind. "Don't let go." They woke hours later in the healer's tent, the scent of antiseptic herbs thick in the air. The first thing Lyra felt was him. He was a constant, warm presence at the edge of her consciousness, a steady rhythm that beat in time with her own pulse. He was lying on the cot next to hers, alive, the poison gone, and they were bound. She could feel every flicker of his emotion, the relief, the confusion, and a deep, soul-shattering guilt that was aimed directly at her. She sat up, her body aching. She looked at him, and he looked at her. "I'm going to break this link," she vowed, her voice raspy. He shook his head, his stormy eyes filled with a desperate intensity she'd never seen before. "No," he rasped back, his voice raw with conviction. "I already lost you once. I will not lose you again." Chapter 6. The Rhythm of a Heartbeat. The High Council convened at dawn. They gathered in the center of the now blood-stained arena, their faces grim. The attack had been unprecedented, a direct assault on their most sacred ceremony. It was a declaration of war from an unknown enemy. Lyra and Ronan were brought before them, the invisible chain that now linked their souls a palpable tension in the air. Lyra stood straight and defiant, her goal to sever this connection and escape this madness. Ronan stood beside her, his presence a silent, unwavering wall of protection. He wanted redemption. He wanted to keep her safe. Their desires were a chaotic storm raging between them. The High Priestess, an ancient she-wolf with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of 1,000 moons, studied them both. Her gaze lingered on the faint, silvery light that now seemed to shimmer in the air between them. "The assassins were after the heir," she declared, her voice echoing in the morning stillness. "And the Protector nearly died defending her. The bond you forged, it was a necessary act of forbidden magic. It saved Alpha Ronan's life." "It's a temporary bond," Lyra insisted, her voice sharp. "It can be broken." "Because it had to be." Feeling his guilt, his regret, his burgeoning hope, it was like being flayed alive. It was too much. Perhaps, the priestess conceded, but the goddess works in mysterious ways. She chose you both for a reason. An attack on the heir is an attack on us all. You, Lyra, must travel to the sacred city of Silverwood to complete your initiation. It is the only place you will be safe, the only place you can learn to control the power that now flows through you. Lyra's heart sank. This was it. This was the cage she had been dreading, closing around her. I will not go. It is not a choice, a stern-faced alpha on the council interjected. Your life is now a symbol. Your safety is paramount. The priestess then turned her gaze to Ronan. And you, Alpha Ronan. The moon named you her protector. You will fulfill your duty. You will escort the heir to Silverwood. You will protect her with your life. They were being locked together, not just by a magical bond, but by a direct order from the highest authority in their world. It was a cruel twist of fate, a punishment designed by a vindictive goddess. Lyra felt a wave of despair so strong it almost buckled her knees. She was trapped with the man who was the source of her deepest pain. Ronan, however, simply inclined his head. I accept, he said, his voice firm, his eyes never leaving Lyra's face. He was accepting his punishment, his chance at redemption. He would chain himself to her to prove he could be the man he should have been all those years ago. And so Act 2 closed not with a choice, but with a decree. Fate was no longer whispering. It was shouting, forcing an intimacy that neither of them was prepared for. They were to be companions on a perilous journey, locked together physically by the council's command and spiritually by a bond of raw, untamed magic. As they were dismissed, Lyra walked away, acutely aware of Ronan falling into step just behind her. She could feel the steady thrum of his heartbeat as if it were her own. She glanced down at her wrist. The silvery mark, the symbol of her new destiny, was pulsing with a soft, gentle light. It beat in perfect, synchronized rhythm with the heart of the man she was supposed to hate. The journey had begun, and there was no turning back. Chapter 7. The Weight of a Thought. The journey began in silence. A heavy, suffocating quiet that the chirping birds and rustling leaves of the deep woods could not pierce. They walked 10 feet apart, a carefully measured distance that did nothing to lessen the invisible chain connecting their souls. Every crunch of a twig under Ronan's boots echoed in Lyra's ears. Every time he shifted the pack on his shoulders, she felt the phantom strain in her own muscles. It was maddening, a constant invasion of her senses, of her very self. She had spent years building walls around her heart, and now this bond was a sledgehammer, turning them to dust with every step he took. Her goal was to ignore it, to treat him like a shadow she was forced to endure, a necessary evil on the path back to her solitude. That night, they made camp in a small clearing protected by ancient, moss-covered oaks. Ronan built a fire with an efficiency that was both impressive and irritating. He moved with a predator's grace, his powerful form outlined by the flickering orange flames. Lyra watched him from across the fire, pretending to sharpen a skinning knife, but she couldn't block him out. Through the bond, she felt a wave of his exhaustion, the deep ache in his muscles from the day's travel. And underneath it, something else. A relentless, simmering guilt that was a constant, low hum in the back of her mind. It was his guilt, but it felt like her own shame. You should eat, he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the ground. He held out a piece of roasted rabbit on a stick. She shook her head. I'm not hungry. A lie. She was starving, but accepting food from him felt like a surrender. A flicker of frustration, sharp and hot, shot across the bond from his side of the fire. She's so stubborn, the thought came, not in words, but as a pure, undiluted feeling. It was followed instantly by a wave of self-loathing, as if he was furious with himself for his own impatience. Lyra flinched, the emotional whiplash making her dizzy. This was impossible. How could she maintain her anger, her righteous fury, when she could feel the war he was fighting inside himself? The cracks in her walls were beginning to show, and it terrified her. She just wanted to control her own heart again. Later, as he was banking the fire for the night, his hand slipped on a rough piece of firewood. A long, shallow splinter drove itself into his palm. He swore under his breath, a sharp hiss of pain. He tried to pull it out, but it was lodged deep. Lyra watched him for a long moment, her jaw tight. Her wolf whimpered inside her. Heal him. She tried to ignore it. It wasn't her problem, but the throbbing pain from his hand was beginning to echo in her own, a dull, phantom ache. With a sigh that sounded more like a growl, she stood up and walked over to him. "Give it here," she commanded, not bothering to make it a request. He looked up, surprised, his stormy eyes wide in the firelight. He hesitated, then slowly extended his hand. The moment her fingers touched his skin to steady his hand, a jolt, electric and searing, shot through the bond. It wasn't just a physical touch. It was a collision of souls. She could feel his shock, his surprise, and a sudden overwhelming surge of desperate, hungry longing that was so intense it stole her breath. Her own heart hammered against her ribs in response. Her touch, it burned right through him. She pulled the splinter out with a quick, deft movement, her hands trembling slightly. She retreated back to her side of the fire without a word. But the silence was different now. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the deafening echo of that single shared touch. Chapter 8. The Ghost of a Word. 3 days into their journey, they reached a small, dusty outpost on the edge of the Crescent Hollow territory. It was little more than a trading post and an inn, a place for travelers to rest before heading into the deeper wilderness. The moment they walked into the inn's common room, the cheerful chatter died. All eyes turned to them, or rather, to her. A few of the older men, guards in Ronan's own pack livery, squinted. A slow, dawning recognition spread across their faces, followed by sneers of contempt. One of them, a burly wolf with a scarred face, nudged his companion. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," he said, his voice loud enough to carry through the room. "It's the weak Omega, the one the Alpha cast off." Lyra froze, her blood turning to ice. The words were a physical blow, a phantom punch to her gut that sent her reeling back in time. She wanted to wither, to disappear, but the girl who withered was gone. She lifted her chin, meeting the guard's cruel gaze with a cold fire of her own. "I have a name," she said, her voice steady, despite the trembling deep inside her. The guard laughed, a nasty, grating sound. "Don't matter what your name is. We all know what you are." Before Lyra could say another word, Ronan moved. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He simply took 2 slow, deliberate steps forward, placing himself between Lyra and the guards. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. He didn't look at the guards. He just stood there, a mountain of silent, lethal fury. The air crackled with his power. "Say another word," Ronan said, his voice a soft, deadly whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. "And you will lose the tongue you speak with." The guards paled, their arrogance evaporating in the face of their Alpha's cold rage. They scrambled to their feet, bowing their heads in submission. "Alpha, we didn't mean any disrespect." "You disrespected her," Ronan corrected, his voice like chipping ice. "Which means you disrespected me. Get out. You are no longer welcome in this inn tonight." The guards practically fell over each other in their haste to obey, scurrying out of the room like frightened mice. The rest of the patrons suddenly found their food and drinks incredibly fascinating. Lyra stood behind him, her heart a tangled mess of conflicting emotions. She was furious that she had needed his protection. She was proud of how she had stood up for herself. And a small, treacherous part of her was grateful. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she refused to name. He had defended her, viciously. He was protecting the very person he had once destroyed. and the role reversal was so stark, so jarring, that it left her breathless. He turned back to her, the fury in his eyes softening into something else, something that looked painfully like regret. He was seeing his own past cruelty mirrored in the faces of his men, and the sight was clearly torturing him. That night, in their shared room at the inn, because there was only one room left, Lyra's sleep was plagued by nightmares. She was back at her rejection ceremony, a skinny, terrified girl of 18. She saw Ronan standing before the whole pack, his face cold and impassive. She heard his voice echo in her mind, the words that had become the defining scars of her life. I, Alpha Ronan Blackwell, reject you, Lyra Vale, as my mate and future Luna. The old pain was as fresh as ever, a knife twisting in her soul. But this time, the dream was different. Through the bond, which was stronger in the dream state, she felt what he had felt in that moment. She felt the iron grip of his control, the pressure from the pack elders, the crushing weight of his duty. And beneath it all, she heard the silent, agonized scream of his wolf. No, I never wanted it. Don't do it. She is ours. The dream shattered, leaving her awake in the dark, gasping for air, the ghost of his wolf's howl echoing in H. Chapter 9. The Price of Light. They left the outpost at dawn, pushing deeper into the treacherous Shadow Claw Mountains. The path grew narrow, winding along the edge of a steep cliff. A thick, unnatural fog rolled in, clinging to the rocks and deadening all sound. Lyra felt a prickle of unease. The air was wrong. It felt heavy, corrupted. Something's here, she whispered, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of her knife. Ronan was already scanning the rocks above them, his body tense, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. I smell it too, he growled. Old blood and dark magic. The attack came without warning. From the fog, 3 grotesque creatures emerged. They were like wolves, but twisted, their bodies hunched and unnatural, with too many joints and glowing red eyes that burned with a malevolent intelligence. They were not natural beasts. They were corruptions, abominations spawned from dark rituals. They moved with a terrifying speed, their claws scraping against the stone. Ronan met the first one with a clash of steel, his sword a blur of silver. He was a brutally effective fighter, a whirlwind of controlled violence. But there were 3 of them. One of them broke past his guard, its red eyes fixed on Lyra. It lunged, a spray of foul-smelling saliva flying from its jaws. She dodged, her knife flashing out, but the creature's hide was like stone. Her blade scraped harmlessly off its flank. It swiped at her, its claws tearing through the sleeve of her tunic and leaving 4 deep, burning gashes on her arm. She cried out in pain as another one cornered Ronan, forcing him closer and closer to the cliff's edge. They were going to be overwhelmed. They were going to die. A desperate, primal fear seized her, not just for herself, but for him. She couldn't let him die. Not now. Not after everything. A strange calm settled over her. She looked down at her wrist, at the silvery mark of the moon. A voice in her head, serene and powerful, whispered, "Let go." She closed her eyes and did something she had never done before. She stopped fighting her power. She stopped trying to control it. She opened herself to it completely. The world went white. An explosion of pure, divine light erupted from her body, centered on the mark on her wrist. It was not a gentle glow. It was a violent, cleansing fire, a miniature sun detonating on the mountainside. The creatures shrieked, a sound of pure agony as the holy light touched their corrupted forms. They dissolved into black smoke and ash, their evil presence wiped from existence in a single blinding flash. The light receded as quickly as it had come, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. Lyra collapsed to her knees, gasping, her entire body trembling violently. The world swam in and out of focus. She felt empty, hollowed out. A thin trickle of blood ran from her nose and dripped onto the stone. Ronan rushed to her side, his face etched with terror. "Lyra, are you all right?" He gently touched her cheek, and his eyes widened as he saw the toll the power had taken. She was deathly pale, her skin clammy, her energy completely drained. This power, her destiny. It wasn't just a gift. It was a poison, slowly killing her with every use. He looked from her trembling form to the sheer drop of the cliff, and then back again. A new, fierce resolve hardened his features. He had been focused on protecting her from others. Now he realized he had to protect her from fate itself. "I swear, Lyra," he whispered, his voice thick with a vow that was more for himself than for her. "I will find a way to fix this. I'll find a cure, no matter what it costs." Chapter 10. The Heart's Undoing. Silverwood was not a city built of stone and wood, but of moonlight and magic. Luminous white towers, spun from what looked like solid light, spiraled towards the sky. The streets were paved with polished river stones that glowed with a soft internal luminescence. The air smelled of night-blooming orchids and ancient, peaceful power. It was breathtakingly beautiful. And to Lyra, it felt like the most elegant cage she had ever seen. They were escorted to the Moon Temple at the city's heart, a magnificent dome of pure, unblemished quartz that pulsed with the gentle rhythm of a sleeping heart. Here, there was no escape. Here, she was the moon's heir, a title that felt more like a brand than an honor. Following their arrival, the High Priestess summoned Lyra to her private chambers, a circular room with a ceiling that was an enchanted, perfect replica of the night sky. Ronan was made to wait outside, a fact Lyra could feel in his simmering frustration through their bond. "The power you wielded in the mountains was raw, untamed," the priestess began, her ancient eyes studying Lyra's face. "It saved you, but it also drained you. This power is a hungry thing, child. It feeds on life force, your life force." Lyra's goal was to find a way out of this destiny, to understand the price she was being asked to pay. She listened, her heart a cold knot in her chest because this confirmed her deepest fears. "The bond you share with your protector. It is both a shield and a catalyst," the old woman continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "His strength will anchor you, but be warned, little moonbeam. A protector's heart is a dangerous thing. It can be your salvation, or your undoing." The words were a riddle, a cryptic warning that slid under Lyra's skin and stayed there, cold and unsettling. What did she mean? How could the very thing meant to save her also be the thing that destroyed her? The priestess offered no further explanation, leaving Lyra with more questions than answers. That night, a special lunar trance was held for her, a ritual meant to help her connect with the source of her new power. She was led to a sacred garden within the temple, where the moonlight was so thick it felt like she could swim in it. Ronan was required to attend, standing guard at the edge of the garden. As Lyra knelt in the center of a silver circle and closed her eyes, the magic of the place took hold. The world fell away, and she was adrift in a sea of silver light. She felt her wolf rise to the surface, not with agitation, but with a deep, peaceful yearning. A second presence joined her in the light. Kale. Ronan's wolf. He wasn't a separate entity. He was an extension of Ronan himself, his essence a warm, protective weight that wrapped around her own. In this ethereal space, there were no walls, no history, no pain. There was only the pure, undeniable truth of their bond. Her wolf and his wolf danced together, two halves of a single soul finally reunited. They brushed against each other, a touch that was more profound than any physical contact. It was a merging of spirits, a sharing of secrets and sorrows and hopes. She felt his profound guilt, his deep, aching regret for rejecting her. But she also felt his fierce, unwavering devotion, a love so powerful it was a physical force. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. It was everything she had ever secretly wanted. Their souls spiraled closer, their wolves preparing to merge, to complete the bond forever. But just as they were about to become one, the priestess's warning echoed in her mind. A protector's heart will be your undoing. Fear, cold and sharp, cut through the warm haze of the trance. She pulled back, violently. She severed the connection, throwing up her mental walls as high as she could. The backlash was instantaneous, a jolt of spiritual pain that felt like being torn in two. She opened her eyes, gasping, to see Ronan staggering at the edge of the garden, a hand clutched to his chest, his face a mask of agony and confusion. She had hurt him, but she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that letting him in would hurt him even more. Chapter 11. The Poison in the Prophecy. The aftermath of the failed trance was a new kind of silence between them. It was a wounded silence, filled with the unspoken questions and the phantom pain of a connection that had been offered and then violently refused. Ronan kept his distance, his confusion and hurt a constant dull ache she felt through the bond. Lyra, in turn, retreated into herself, determined to understand the priestess's warning. She needed to save him, and to do that she had to understand the danger. So she sought answers in the one place they might be found, the temple's great library, a vast circular chamber where millennia of shifter history and lore were recorded on thousands of delicate scrolls. She told the temple acolytes she was studying healing arts, a plausible lie they readily accepted. For 2 days, she pored over ancient texts, her fingers stained with dust and ink. She read about past heirs, about the nature of the moon's magic, and about prophecies that had been twisted by time. It was on the 3rd day, in a forgotten alcove behind a tapestry depicting the first Alpha, that she found it. It was a small, leather-bound book, its pages brittle with age. The script was archaic, the language nearly lost to time. It was not the official sanitized version of the prophecy that everyone knew. This was the original, the raw, unedited version. And as she translated the faded script, her blood ran cold. The prophecy was a curse disguised as a blessing. The moon's heir was indeed a vessel of great power, destined to heal the growing rift between the packs. But that power came at a terrible price. The text was brutally clear. The heir's light is born from sacrifice. To fully embrace the moon's power and ascend, the heart that protects her must be given freely. When her chosen protector's love is true, his heart will cease its beat, and his life force shall become the final key, unlocking her full divinity. Ronan wasn't meant to live through her initiation. He was the fuel for her fire. His death was the final required ingredient. If he truly, deeply loved her, he was going to die the moment she was fully chosen. A choked, horrified sob escaped her lips. The scroll slipped from her numb fingers. The priestess's warning wasn't about him hurting her. It was about her love killing him. Every tender look, every protective gesture, every crack in his armor that let his true feelings show through was another nail in his coffin. The growing bond, the undeniable pull between them. It was a death sentence. And she was the executioner. The realization shattered her. Love was the weapon. Her love, his love, it was all poison. She found him in the training grounds, sparring with 2 of the temple guards. He moved with a lethal, focused grace, but she could feel his distraction. He was worried about her. He was trying to give her space. The sight of him, so strong, so alive, so utterly doomed, broke something inside her. She had to save him. There was only one way. She had to destroy his love for her. She had to make him hate her again. She strode onto the training grounds, her face a mask of cold fury. "Leave us!" she commanded the guards. They glanced at Ronan, who gave a curt nod, his expression wary. Once they were alone, she turned on him, her voice dripping with venom. "This has to stop," she spat. This act, following me around like a lost puppy. Do you think because the moon made a mistake that it changes anything? Do you think I could ever forget what you did?" He flinched, his face paling. "Lyra, she sneered, stepping closer, her words like daggers. "You're sorry? Your apologies are worthless. You broke me, Ronan. You stood in front of everyone I had ever known and you threw me away like trash because you thought I was weak. And now you want to play the hero, the noble protector? It's pathetic." She pushed him, hard, in the chest. "I don't want your protection. I don't need it. Go back to your pack. Go back to your perfect, controlled life and leave me alone." Every cruel word was a lie, and every lie was a shard of glass in her own throat. She was pushing him away to save his life, and the act was destroying her. He just stared at her, his eyes filled with a deep, bottomless pain. He didn't get angry. He didn't defend himself. He just took it. "I can't leave you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I won't." "Then I'll make you," she vowed, her own tears threatening to fall. She turned and fled, running from the training ground, from the temple, from him. She ran until her lungs burned and she collapsed in a hidden corner of the garden, finally letting the sobs tear through her. She cried for him, for his stupid, noble heart that was going to get him killed. She cried for the love she had to crush to save him. Ronan watched her go, his heart a gaping wound in his chest. He didn't understand. Why now? Why this sudden, vicious cruelty? He sank to his knees, utterly lost. And deep within him, his wolf, Kale, who had felt the truth behind her lies, whispered a single heartbreaking thought into his mind. "She is not pushing you away, Alpha. She is protecting you." Chapter 12. The Defiance of a Traitor. Lyra's violent rejection created a chasm between them. For 2 days, Ronan honored her demand for space, his presence a brooding, wounded shadow at the edge of her awareness. The pain he felt was a constant, bitter taste in her mouth, but she held firm. It was better for him to be hurt by her words than to be killed by her love. But her plan, born of desperation, had a fatal flaw. It assumed they had time. On the third night, as she sat by the window in her temple quarters, staring out at the serene, glowing city, the attack came. It was nothing like the chaotic assault at the gathering. This was silent, professional. One moment, she was alone. The next, a hand clamped over her mouth, and the sharp prick of a dart filled with a powerful sedative bit into her neck. Her world dissolved into a dizzying gray fog. The last thing she saw before consciousness fled was the glint of a familiar tattoo on the assassin's wrist. The crescent moon with a slash through it, the same mark she had seen on the dying wolf in the forest. An open loop from her past had just snapped shut around her throat. Her kidnappers moved like ghosts, spiriting her out of the Moon Temple without raising a single alarm. They were experts. They knew the temple's layout, its patrols, its blind spots. Ronan knew the instant she was in danger. 1 second, he felt her distant, sorrowful presence through the bond. The next, a blinding spike of pure, undiluted terror shot through him, followed by nothing. The bond went silent. It wasn't broken. It was blocked, muffled, as if she had been plunged deep underwater. It was a violation so profound that a feral roar ripped from his throat. He was across the temple grounds in seconds, slamming through the doors of her chambers to find them empty, her window wide open to the night. The faint alien scent of her abductors lingered in the air, but it was already fading. He raised the alarm, and the temple erupted into chaos. The temple guard, led by a stern alpha named Marcus, began a lockdown. "We will handle this, Alpha Blackwell," Marcus stated, his tone officious and dismissive. "You are a guest here. Your duty is to remain within the temple walls for your own safety." The council was already being informed. They would send trackers. They would follow protocol. Ronan looked at the man as if he had just sprouted a second head. Protocol? Rules? They had his mate. The very thought of waiting, of letting others handle it while she was in the hands of assassins, was so abhorrent that his wolf clawed at his insides, demanding release. Kale's whisper was a chilling echo of his own thoughts. "She is protecting you. Now you protect her." His path was clear. His redemption was not in following orders. It was in breaking every single rule to get her back. "To hell with your protocol," Ronan snarled, his eyes blazing with golden light. He shoved past Marcus, his aura flaring with an alpha's absolute command that sent the lesser guards stumbling back. I am her protector. My duty is to her, not to your council. He leapt from the open window, landing lightly on the soft grass 3 stories below. He was a traitor now. He was defying the High Council, the Temple Guard, the laws that had governed his entire life, and he didn't care. The only law that mattered was the one seared into his soul. Find her. Save her. He tracked them through the glowing city and into the dark, tangled woods beyond. He was relentless, a force of nature driven by pure, obsessive desperation. He found them hours later in a ruined temple deep in the forest. Lyra was conscious, tied to a crumbling stone altar, her eyes wide with fear. The assassins were chanting, preparing for some dark ritual. Ronan didn't hesitate. He didn't plan. He exploded from the trees, a blur of rage and vengeance. The fight was brutal and short. He moved with a savagery he hadn't unleashed in years, his sword a silver arc of death. He was wounded, a deep gash on his arm and a cut across his cheek, but he barely felt it. He cut her free, his hands gentle as he untied the ropes. "I've got you," he breathed, pulling her into his arms. Relief, so powerful it made her knees weak, flooded through her. He had come for her. He had broken all the rules for her. In that moment, she forgot about the prophecy, forgot about the danger. She was just safe in his arms. But as he held her, a sharp, burning pain flared on her wrist. She looked down in horror. The silvery mark of the moon, once a symbol of hope and destiny, was darkening, its edges turning a bruised, angry purple as if poisoned by their defiance. Chapter 13. A Kiss of Ruin. They found refuge in a damp, moss-covered cave behind a waterfall, the constant roar of the water a curtain of sound that shielded them from the world. Ronan's arm was bleeding freely now, the gash from the assassin's blade deeper than she had first thought. The dark, angry purple of her own mark seemed to mock them from her wrist, a constant reminder of their defiance. He slumped against the cave wall, his face pale and slick with sweat in the dim light. She saw the pain he was trying to hide, felt the weakness seeping into him through their bond. Her healer's instinct was a fierce, undeniable thing. The prophecy be damned. She couldn't let him die. Not like this. Kneeling before him, she tore a strip of cloth from her tunic. "This is going to hurt," she said, her voice soft but firm. He just watched her, his stormy eyes filled with a weary trust that made her heart ache. Simple herbs wouldn't close a wound this deep, and her stores of magic were dangerously low after the battle. There was only one other way, a method that was as intimate as it was powerful. She took her knife, and without hesitating, drew a thin, shallow line across her own palm. Blood, shimmering with a faint silvery light, welled up instantly. "What are you doing?" Ronan rasped, trying to pull his arm away. "Saving your life," she whispered, pressing her bleeding palm firmly against his wound. The moment their blood mingled, the bond between them erupted. It was no longer a thread. It was a torrent, a river of shared life and shared soul that poured between them, sealing the connection permanently. A gasp was torn from both their throats. She felt the wound knit together under her hand, his flesh healing at a miraculous rate. But she also felt everything. The crushing weight of his guilt, the raw, agonizing memory of the day he rejected her, the years of silent suffering his wolf had endured. It was a pain so profound it brought tears to her eyes. He pulled her closer, his good arm wrapping around her, his forehead resting against hers. He was shaking. "I was a fool," he breathed, the words a raw, broken confession. "My father, his mate was killed in a rogue attack because he was too soft, too distracted by love. The elders whispered that I had his weakness. They said you were too gentle, too kind. They said a strong alpha needed a ruthless Luna to survive." His voice cracked. "I chose my pack over my soul. I chose pride over you because I was a coward, and I have paid for it every single day since." He finally said it. The truth. Not an excuse, but a reason, born of fear and misguided duty. And in his confession, Lyra felt the last of her anger dissolve, replaced by a deep, aching sorrow for the boy he had been and the man he had become. "I know," she whispered, her tears now falling freely. "I felt it. In the dream. I felt Cale." She was terrified of the prophecy, terrified of losing him, terrified of the love that was blooming in the ruins of her heart. But in this cave, with the world hunting them, none of that seemed to matter as much as the man in front of her. She believed love would kill him, but his absence felt like a death of its own. He lifted his head, his eyes searching hers, and the space between them became charged, electric. "Don't hate me, Lyra," he pleaded, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Hate is better than this," she choked out, because this hope, this impossible feeling, was far more dangerous. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips, and she knew what was coming. It was a terrible, beautiful, catastrophic mistake, and she wanted it more than she wanted her next breath. He hesitated, giving her a chance to pull away. She didn't. He closed the distance, and their first real kiss was not gentle. It was devastating. A collision of guilt and forgiveness, of sorrow and hope. It was the taste of ruin on her lips, and she surrendered to it completely, knowing she was sealing his fate with her own. Chapter 14. The Traitor's Choice. Their return to Silverwood was met not with relief, but with cold, hard judgment. The temple guards surrounded them the moment they stepped out of the woods, their spears leveled, their faces grim. Ronan was immediately disarmed and shackled in chains forged with silver and wolfsbane, designed to suppress a shifter's strength. Lyra was escorted away, separated from him, the sudden severing of his physical presence leaving a gaping, hollow void in her soul. She was taken to her chambers and told not to leave. She was no longer an honored guest. She was a ward, a problem to be managed. The council had branded Ronan a traitor, for defying their orders, for abandoning his post, for acting like a rogue. He was to be stripped of his alpha title and sentenced to the black cells to await final judgment. Lyra paced her room like a caged animal. Every emotion that flashed through Ronan, the cold fury, the defiant pride, the underlying terror for her safety, crashed against her through the bond. They were keeping him in a holding cell in the temple's lower levels, and the magical suppression of the room felt like a constant, dull pressure against her own spirit. She was torn. A part of her, the old, broken part, whispered that this was what he deserved. It was his pride that had led them here, but a much stronger part, the part that had kissed him in the cave, the part that now knew the truth of his heart, screamed in protest. Her internal flaw, her desperate need for control, was beginning to crumble. She couldn't control the council. She couldn't control his fate. What could she possibly do? Her choice was made for her that evening. Hiding in the shadows of her balcony, she overheard two guards talking in the courtyard below. "They're transporting him at moonrise," the first one said. "The council wants him out of Silverwood. Too much of a distraction for the heir." The other guard grunted. "Good riddance. I heard Alpha Marcus gave the transfer team special orders. A traitor like that might try to escape. It would be a shame if he had a fatal accident on the road." A cold dread washed over Lyra. They weren't just punishing him. They were going to kill him. They were going to murder him and call it an accident. In that moment, her conflict vanished, replaced by a fierce, burning clarity. Her duty? Her destiny? They were meaningless words if the person who gave them meaning was dead. The council, the prophecy, the entire system. It was all a lie, a gilded cage designed to use her, to use him. She would not be their puppet. She would not let them take him from her. She waited until the deepest point of the night, when the temple was quiet. Using the knowledge she'd gained from her time in the library, she slipped out of her room and navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the temple's lower levels. She was no longer just a healer. She was a rogue, a survivor. She moved with a purpose that was sharp and deadly. She found the holding cells guarded by a single acolyte who was dozing in a chair. A small pouch of sleeping herbs, blown through a hollow reed, ensured he wouldn't wake for hours. The lock on Ronan's cell was magically sealed, but the moon's power answered to her now. She placed her hand on the cold iron, and the silvery mark on her wrist flared. The lock dissolved with a soft, sizzling sound. She pushed the heavy door open. Ronan was on his feet in an instant, the sound of her approach having alerted him. He was chained to the wall, but his eyes were blazing with a wild, hopeful light when he saw her. "Lyra, what are you doing?" he breathed, his voice rough. "Saving you," she said, her own voice trembling with the enormity of her decision. She placed her hands on his shackles, and light poured from her palms, shattering the enchanted chains. He was free. He stood before her, rubbing his wrists, his eyes searching hers, filled with awe and disbelief. He saw the resolve in her face, the fierce rebellion in her eyes. "They'll hunt you too," he warned, his voice low. "You'll be branded a traitor with me." "Let them," she whispered, sealing her rebellion, her choice, her fate. "They were your pack. Now you're mine." She took his hand, and together they ran. Chapter 15. Surrender in the Storm. They fled into the wilderness, two traitors against the world. They ran for a full day, pushing themselves to the brink of exhaustion, the bond between them a humming wire of shared adrenaline and fear. Lyra led them to a place she'd only read about in the ancient scrolls, the ruins of the first Moon Temple, a place so old and sacred that most believed it was only a myth. It was nestled in a hidden valley, a skeleton of crumbling white stone arches and vine-choked courtyards, a ghost of what Silverwood had become. It was a place where their bond felt stronger, the ancient magic of the stones seeming to amplify their connection. As they stumbled into the relative shelter of the main sanctuary, the sky broke open. A storm of biblical proportions descended upon the valley. Rain came down in solid, blinding sheets. Wind howled through the broken arches, a mournful, angry sound. Jagged bolts of lightning illuminated the ruins in stark, terrifying flashes, followed by claps of thunder so loud they seemed to crack the very foundations of the earth. The storm trapped them, physically and emotionally, in the heart of the crumbling temple. The tension that had been simmering between them since the kiss, since the escape, finally boiled over. There was nowhere left to run, no more words to hide behind. "You shouldn't have done it, Lyra," Ronan said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. He was pacing the length of the sanctuary, his body coiled with a restless energy. "You threw away everything for me. Your destiny, your safety." "What destiny?" she shot back, her voice rising to match the storm. "A destiny that requires you to be a sacrifice? A destiny that wants me to stand by while the council executes you in the dark? That's not a destiny, Ronan. It's a death sentence." The finality of her own words hung in the air between them, a truth so terrible they had both avoided speaking it aloud until now. The last of her walls crumbled, and the raw, terrified heart beneath was laid bare. "I read the true prophecy," she confessed, her voice breaking. "The original one. It says, 'For me to ascend, my protector has to die. Your love is the key that kills you.'" He stopped pacing. He just stared at her, the lightning flashes illuminating the dawning horror on his face. He finally understood her cruelty at the temple, her desperate attempts to push him away. It wasn't hatred. It was a desperate, hopeless act of love. He crossed the space between them in 2 long strides, his hands coming up to cup her face, his touch both fierce and gentle. "Then let it," he said, his voice thick with a resolve that stole her breath. "If my death means you live, that you become what you were meant to be, then it is a price I will pay gladly." "No," she cried, pounding her fists against his chest. "I won't let you. I won't be the reason you die." "You won't be the reason," he whispered, catching her hands and holding them tight against his heart. "You'll be the purpose." He looked at her, his stormy eyes full of a love so profound, so absolute, it eclipsed the rage of the storm. In that moment, there was no prophecy. There was no counsel. There was only the man in front of her willing to give up his last breath for her. The tension snapped. The fight went out of her, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated love. She gave in. She surrendered to the bond, to him, to the beautiful, tragic certainty of their fate. She wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled his mouth down to hers. This kiss was nothing like the first. It was a slow, deep, soul-searing surrender. It was the culmination of every shared glance, every silent touch, every beat of their connected hearts. Passion and love collided, a storm inside to match the one outside. They sank to the floor of the ancient temple, their bodies moving together in a desperate, loving dance. It was an act of pure, beautiful defiance against the fate that sought to tear them apart. It was a promise, a vow, a moment of perfect, untainted unity. And as their souls and bodies finally became one, a searing, white-hot pain erupted from Lyra's wrist. She cried out, arching against him. On her skin, the prophecy mark, which had been a bruised purple, was now glowing with a brilliant, terrifying blood-red light. The final moon was near. Their single act of love had just started the countdown to the end. Chapter 16: The Poison of a Half-Truth. The morning after the storm felt like a fragile truce. The air in the ruins was washed clean, smelling of wet stone and new earth. Curled beside Ronan under his cloak, Lyra watched the dawn paint the sky in soft shades of pink and gray. The terrifying red glow of her mark had subsided to a dull, angry throb, a constant reminder of the countdown they had started. For a few stolen moments, there was no prophecy, no counsel, only the steady beat of his heart against her back and the warmth of his body chasing away the chill. They were a team now, fugitives bound by a love that was destined to be fatal. A beautiful, tragic, hopeless team. But as the sun rose higher, the quiet was broken by a single, sharp whistle from the edge of the valley. Ronan was on his feet in an instant, shielding her, a low growl rumbling in his chest. A figure emerged from the trees, walking with an easy, confident stride. He was tall and lean, with the same silvery blonde hair as Lyra and eyes the color of pale jade. He wore the leathers of a rogue, but he carried himself with the unmistakable arrogance of a high-born alpha. A chilling sense of recognition washed over Lyra. She knew that face. She'd seen it in childhood memories she thought were long buried. "Caden?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Hello, little cousin," he said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "I've been looking for you for a long time." Caden Vale, her mother's nephew. She'd thought he and his entire family had been wiped out in the border wars a decade ago. His presence here was impossible. Ronan stepped forward, positioning himself squarely in front of Lyra. "State your business," he commanded, his voice pure alpha authority. Caden's smile widened. He ignored Ronan completely, his eyes fixed on Lyra. "My business is with her, with family." He took another step, and his scent finally registered, the sharp tang of an alpha, but underneath it, something else. Something ancient and wild and not entirely wolf. "You're wondering how I found you," Caden continued, his tone conversational, yet filled with menace. "Let's just say I have allies who are very interested in your unique heritage. The Council has been lying to you, Lyra, to all of us." He began to spin a tale that felt both insane and terrifyingly true. He told her the prophecy she'd read was a half-truth, a version twisted by the Council to suit their needs. "They don't want you to ascend, cousin. They want to control you," he explained, his voice a hypnotic murmur. "Because you're not just some powerful Omega. Our grandmother, she wasn't a wolf. She was a child of the moon itself, a goddess. That power, the power that is slowly draining your life force, it's because your mortal body can't contain your divine blood. The prophecy wasn't about sacrifice, it was about transformation. Lyra's mind reeled. Half-goddess? It was a madness. Yet it explained the intensity of her power, the way it was consuming her from the inside out. Why would they hide this? She breathed. Because a half-goddess cannot be leashed, Caden said, his eyes glittering. But her power can be stolen. That's their real plan. A ritual to strip you of your divinity and claim it for themselves. His words landed like stones in her gut. She felt used, a pawn in a game she never even knew she was playing. Her trust in the world, already so fractured, crumbled into dust. She didn't know who to believe, what to think. She looked to Ronan, but his face was a mask of grim fury. His distrust of Caden a palpable wave she felt through the bond. They're already making their move, Caden said, his voice dropping. The priestess is a snake, and your protector. He paused, letting the poison seep in. He's more tangled in her web than you think. Don't believe me? Come see for yourself. He led her to a quiet pool of water in the courtyard. With a whispered incantation, the surface of the water shimmered, showing them an image. It was a clearing, miles away. The high priestess stood there, waiting. And then, from the trees, a figure emerged to meet her. Ronan. Lyra's heart stopped. She watched in horror as her Ronan, the man who had just held her, the man who had sworn to defy the world for her, secretly met with the very woman who represented the council that wanted him dead. He held out a small leather-wrapped object, and the priestess took it. It looked like a deal, a trade, a betrayal. He's buying his freedom, Caden whispered in her ear, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Saving his own skin, he's going to trade you for it. The image in the water shattered, but the image in her mind remained. Her newfound trust, so fragile and precious, was utterly destroyed. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. A cold, dead numbness spread through her. She turned and ran, not just from the ruins, but from him. Chapter 17. The last beat of a protector's heart. The forest was a blur of green and brown. Lyra ran with no destination, fueled by the hollow, echoing agony of betrayal. The bond that had once been a source of comfort was now an instrument of torture. She could feel Ronan's frantic confusion, his desperate howling search for her. Lyra, where are you? What's wrong? His emotions crashed against her, but she walled them off, encasing her heart in ice. He had lied. He had met with the priestess behind her back. Caden's words echoed in her mind. He's going to trade you. The pain was so immense it felt like it would split her in two. She finally stumbled to a halt in a clearing dominated by a circle of ancient standing stones, her lungs burning, her body shaking with exhaustion and grief. She was alone, completely and utterly alone. And then, she wasn't. Figures emerged from the shadows between the stones, their gray robes marking them as the priestess's elite guard. And leading them, her face serene and implacable, was the high priestess herself. There was no escape. "Child, you have caused enough trouble," the priestess said, her voice calm, yet carrying an edge of cold steel. "It is time to accept your fate." She wasn't here to kill her. Lyra understood that now. Caden was right. They were here to perform their ritual, to steal the divinity that flowed through her veins. "My fate is my own," Lyra spat, backing away, her hand reaching for a knife that wasn't there. "You are mistaken," the priestess said, a flicker of pity in her ancient eyes. She raised a hand, and one of the guards stepped forward, holding a black obsidian box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a single, twisted thorn, pulsing with a malevolent purple energy. "This artifact will sever your connection to your divine half. It will not harm your body, but the part of you that is Lyra Vale will be quieted. Your power will be preserved for those who know how to wield it properly." It was the curse, the tool for her violation, It would leave her an empty shell, a mindless vessel. Just as the priestess began to chant, a roar of pure, unadulterated fury ripped through the clearing. Ronan exploded from the trees like a vengeful god, his sword a blur of silver. He had found her, he had tracked her. His eyes were locked on her, filled with a desperate, frantic love before they shifted to the priestess and the thorn. He saw it. He understood their plan in a single, horrified instant. He fought with the strength of 10 alphas, a whirlwind of desperation and rage. But he was one wolf against a dozen of the council's best. He was outmatched. The priestess saw her chance. While Ronan was occupied, she raised the thorn, its dark energy coalescing into a shimmering beam of purple light aimed directly at Lyra's heart. "It is done!" she cried. Time seemed to slow down. Lyra was frozen, mesmerized by the terrible beauty of the energy that was about to unmake her. She saw Ronan look at her, his fight with the guards forgotten. In his eyes, she saw his choice. It was a moment of perfect, heartbreaking clarity. With a final, desperate surge of strength, he threw himself in front of her. He took the full force of the curse. It didn't just pierce him, it consumed him. The purple energy engulfed his body, and a scream was torn from his lips. A sound of pure, unimaginable agony. The magic, designed to unravel a half-divine being, was ripping his mortal soul apart. He collapsed, his body falling back into her arms. The light faded. The clearing was silent, save for Lyra's own ragged breathing. He looked up at her, his stormy eyes already glazing over, his life fading with every passing second. He tried to speak, his lips stained with blood. The object I gave her?" He coughed, a pained rasp. "It was my alpha title, my pack. I gave it all up. For you." He hadn't been making a deal to save himself. He had been divesting himself of his duties, freeing himself to be only hers. It was an abdication, an ultimate act of devotion. And she had thought, oh gods, what had she done? Tears streamed down her face as she clutched him to her. "Ronan, no, please." He smiled, a faint, bloody curve of his lips. He raised a trembling hand to her cheek, and in her mind, she heard the last fading whisper of his wolf, a final gift from his soul to hers. "You were never weak." His hand fell. His eyes went vacant. The steady, thrumming presence that had been a constant in her soul for weeks went silent. He was gone. Chapter 18. When the Moon Weeps. The silence was a physical thing, a heavy, crushing weight that pressed in on Lyra from all sides. The world had gone mute. The chirping of birds, the rustle of leaves, the frantic shouts of the priestess's guards, all of it was a distant, meaningless hum. The only reality was the dead weight of Ronan's body in her arms and the gaping, screaming void where their bond used to be. He was gone. The simple, absolute finality of it was a knife in her heart, twisting and twisting. The priestess and her guards were staring, their plan in ruins. The sacrifice in the prophecy was meant to be a transfer of life force, not an annihilation by a dark artifact. Ronan's heart, the key to everything, was now still. His soul had been extinguished. Whatever they had planned was now impossible. With a frustrated curse, the priestess gave the order to retreat, her guards melting back into the shadows, leaving Lyra alone in the stone circle with her dead. She didn't notice them leave. She noticed nothing but the cold feel of Ronan's skin and the emptiness that was consuming her. This was the end of the line. Everything. The prophecy, her power, her bloodline, it was all a cruel joke, and he was the punchline. She had spent so much time fearing a destiny that would kill him, only to have her own foolish mistrust lead him to his death anyway. A raw, guttural scream of pure, undiluted anguish tore from her throat, echoing off the ancient stones. It was a sound of absolute heartbreak. She looked up at the sky, at the full, impassive silver moon hanging there like a cold, judgmental eye. This was its fault, the goddess's fault, for this cursed gift, for this twisted fate. "Do you see?" She shrieked at the moon, tears carving hot tracks through the dirt and blood on her cheeks. Is this what you wanted? I reject you. I reject your power, your destiny, all of it. If this is the price, I don't want it. Take it back. I choose him. She screamed her defiance at the heavens, renouncing the very magic that defined her. She chose him in life, and she would choose him in death. As the words of her rejection left her lips, a searing pain erupted on her wrist. She looked down and watched as the blood-red mark of the air began to sizzle. It curled in on itself, burning away like a piece of parchment thrown into a fire, leaving nothing but smooth, unblemished skin behind. The power that had hummed in her veins, the divine energy that had been both her gift and her curse, drained out of her in a sudden, violent rush. It left her feeling hollow, mortal, weak. She was nothing now, just a girl, shivering in a forest, holding the body of the man she loved. This was her lowest point. Stripped of her destiny, her love, her very identity. She had been a rogue, then an heir, then a traitor. Now she was simply broken. All the pride she had built, all the strength she had nurtured, it was all gone, burned away by grief. She finally understood. Love wasn't weakness. Her fear of it, her refusal to trust it, that had been the true weakness. She curled up beside Ronan's still form, laying her head on his silent chest, the cold of the forest floor seeping into her bones. She would stay here. She would let the cold take her. She would simply stop. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the despair. But as she lay there, a single impossible thing happened. The moon in the sky above, so cold and distant moments before, seemed to shimmer. For a heartbeat, its light softened, pulsed with a gentle, sorrowful rhythm. And from its luminous face, a single drop of liquid silver detached itself. It was not rain. It was a tear, a divine tear of pure, concentrated moonlight. It fell from the heavens in a slow, silent, graceful arc, a tiny spark of impossible hope descending into the absolute darkness of her world. And it landed with a soft, ethereal hiss directly on Ronan's cold, still lips. Chapter 19. The choice of one heart darkness was a welcome blanket. Lyra sank into it, letting the cold of the earth seep into her bones, a gentle numbness that promised an end to the agony. She was done. The fight was over. Ronan was gone, and the part of her that was still alive wished it wasn't. But the divine tear, that single drop of liquid moonlight, had landed on his lips. It didn't fizzle or fade. It sank into his skin, a soft hiss of silver light that was absorbed in an instant. Nothing happened. The silence remained. The cold remained. The despair remained. Lyra closed her eyes, ready for the end. And then, a voice. It wasn't a sound in her ears, but a feeling in her soul. A presence, ancient and vast and overwhelmingly feminine, filled the void inside her. It was the moon, the goddess. She didn't speak in words, but in pure, undiluted understanding that flowed directly into Lyra's mind. You rejected my gift. The thought was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, tinged with a deep, cosmic sorrow. Lyra's spirit, weary and broken, answered without words. Your gift killed him. No, child, the goddess corrected, her presence a gentle, comforting warmth against the ice of Lyra's grief. The pride of wolves twisted it. They feared a power they could not control, and so they wrote their fear into prophecy. They made my blessing of unity into a curse of sacrifice. The bond I gave you was never meant to end in death. It was meant to create a beginning. Images flooded Lyra's mind, not memories, but possibilities. She saw a world where alphas and omegas ruled as equals, where strength was found not in dominance, but in partnership. She saw the future the Council had tried to prevent, a future she was meant to build. The power she had rejected. It wasn't for her. It was for them. All of them. You made a choice. the goddess continued, her thought voice filled with a solemn respect. You chose one heart over a crown of stars, a choice no heir has ever made. And so, I give you another. 2 points of light appeared in the darkness of her mind. One was a brilliant, blazing sun, the full divine power, her destiny restored, the ability to remake the world. The other was a single, steady flame, a mortal life, a beating heart, a soul returned from the edge of oblivion. You cannot have both. The universe demands balance, one heart restored, or your destiny fulfilled. Choose. For the old Lyra, the girl who craved control, who feared weakness, this would have been an impossible choice. Duty versus desire. The needs of the many versus the needs of one. But she was not that girl anymore. She had held the cost of that duty in her arms. She had felt the silence where a heartbeat should be. There was no choice at all. Him, she answered, her soul screaming the word with every ounce of will she had left. I choose him. Always. The blazing sun in her mind faded away, its light willingly sacrificed. All that remained was the single steady flame. It grew brighter and brighter until it filled her entire being. A new warmth spread through her, not the wild, consuming fire of divine power, but the gentle, life-affirming heat of pure love. It flowed out of her, across the bond that had never truly broken, and into the still form beside her. A gasp. Not hers. She opened her eyes, her breath catching in her throat. Ronan's chest rose with a single shuddering breath. The gray, lifeless tone of his skin was giving way to color. He coughed, and his stormy eyes, no longer vacant, fluttered open. They were confused for a moment, and then they found hers. Alive. He was alive, reborn not by a goddess's power, but by her forgiveness, by her choice. Chapter 20. Omega and Alpha as One. Ronan stared up at her, his expression a mixture of profound confusion and dawning wonder. Lyra? He rasped, his voice raw, as if pulled from a great distance. I was gone. I chose you, she whispered, the words feeling like the most profound truth she had ever spoken. Tears of relief, hot and cleansing, streamed down her face as she helped him sit up. I chose you over everything. The bond between them flared to life, no longer a simple connection but a blazing conduit of shared life. She felt his strength returning, his heart beating a steady, powerful rhythm that echoed in her own chest. And he felt her sacrifice, the absence of the overwhelming divine power, replaced by something quieter, deeper, and infinitely more resolute. Their reunion was cut short by the snap of a twig from the edge of the clearing. They were on their feet in an instant, moving together as a single fluid unit. A dozen figures stepped out from between the standing stones. Not the priestess's guards this time. These were the council's priests, the old, hard-faced alphas who pulled the strings from the shadows, their robes a deep blood red. The high priestess was with them, her face pale, her expression one of grim resignation. She was a puppet, Lyra realized, not the master. The true enemy had finally shown its face. Impossible, one of the priests, a wolf with a heavily scarred face and dead black eyes, snarled. He was dead. The curse should have annihilated his soul. You miscalculated, Ronan said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He stood slightly in front of Lyra, a protector once more, but this time she stood with him, a hand on his arm, their stances perfectly aligned. You thought love was a weakness you could exploit. You were wrong. The scarred priest laughed, a humorless, ugly sound. Love is a fairy tale for pups. What matters is power, the girl's power, and we will have it, even if we have to tear it from her cooling corpse. He gave a sharp signal, and the red-robed priests began to advance, their hands glowing with a dark, corrupting energy. They were preparing to attack, to finish the ritual themselves. Lyra felt a flicker of the old fear. The divine fire was gone. How could she fight this? But then she felt Ronan's unwavering strength beside her, his hand covering hers. She was not a goddess. She was not the all-powerful heir. But she was not just an Omega either. And he was not just an Alpha. They were something more. Together. She closed her eyes, not reaching for the heavens, but reaching for him. She poured her essence, her love, her very will into the bond. And he, in turn, opened his soul completely to her, offering his alpha strength, his primal power, his unshakable resolve. It was not a joining of wolves, like in the trance. It was a complete and total fusion of purpose. His strength became her shield. Her intuitive connection to the bond became his weapon. A soft, silver light began to glow around them, not the explosive fire of before, but a steady, resilient radiance. When she opened her eyes, they were glowing with the same golden light as his. They were one, Alpha and Omega, protector and healer, a perfect, unbreakable whole. "You want power?" Lyra's voice rang out, clear and strong, resonating with Ronan's own growl. "Let us show you power." They charged forward, ready for the final battle, a united force against the corruption that had tried to tear them apart. They would not just survive. They would cleanse the world of this rot, starting now. Chapter 21. The Blood Temple's Heart. The battle in the clearing was short and decisive. The priests, so confident in their dark magic, were not prepared for the reality of Lyra and Ronan's fused power. It was like fighting a force of nature. Ronan's physical prowess, amplified by the bond, was unstoppable. Lyra, moving in perfect sync with him, didn't need divine fire. She could see the flows of their magic, anticipating their attacks, weaving a shield of pure will that deflected their curses. They didn't kill the priests. They broke them, shattering their connection to their dark power and leaving them as little more than humbled, powerless old wolves. The priestess, seeing her masters defeated, simply vanished into the forest, a ghost escaping the judgment she deserved. In the aftermath, panting and bruised but victorious, Lyra and Ronan knew this was not the end. Defeating a few acolytes in the woods was one thing. Tearing out the rot at its source was another. They were channeling their power from somewhere, Lyra said, her connection to the flow of magic still lingering. A focal point, an anchor. Silverwood, Ronan breathed, his expression hardening. They wouldn't keep the source of their power anywhere else. He looked at her, his eyes asking the question he didn't need to speak. Running was no longer an option. Hiding would solve nothing. The council would regroup. They would find another way. They had to end this, now and forever. Their goal was no longer survival. It was liberation. They would not just save themselves. They would destroy the curse of fated suffering that the council had built to maintain its control. Their journey back to the glowing city was not one of stealth and fear, but of grim, silent purpose. They moved with the speed of wolves who knew their territory, their fused senses making them aware of every patrol, every guard post. They bypassed them all, slipping into Silverwood under the cover of the new moon like two avenging spirits. Lyra's knowledge of the temple, combined with Ronan's strategic mind, made them an impossibly effective team. She knew the secret paths. He knew the guards' rotations. They made their way to a part of the temple that wasn't on any map, a section deep beneath the main sanctuary that was spoken of only in hushed, fearful whispers, the Blood Temple. It was here, Lyra realized, that the council had twisted the moon's prophecy. It was here they anchored their power. The air grew colder as they descended, the beautiful glow of the city above giving way to a sinister, pulsing red light that emanated from a set of massive obsidian doors. The doors were guarded by two hulking brutes, elite warriors of the council's inner circle. This time there would be no sneaking past. Lyra and Ronan shared a single look. No words were needed. This was the final threshold. Beyond these doors lay the heart of the corruption. Beyond these doors, they would either cleanse the world or die trying. Ronan drew his sword, its polished surface reflecting the hungry crimson light. Lyra's hands began to glow with the soft, silver radiance of her own power, a light that was now stabilized and controlled, no longer by destiny, but by love. She had found her strength not in a prophecy, but in a partner. They were ready. The final confrontation was about to begin. They took a deep, shared breath and charged the doors. Chapter 22. The Anchor of Suffering. The obsidian doors of the Blood Temple shuddered under their combined assault and burst inward. The chamber beyond was a desecration, a hellish mirror of the Moon Temple above. The air was thick with the coppery scent of old blood and the acrid smell of burnt magic. Instead of glowing white quartz, the walls were of jagged black basalt that seemed to drink the light. In the center of the room, on a raised dais, stood a massive, pulsating crystal the size of a man. It glowed with a sickening blood-red light, and veins of black corruption snaked through its core. This was it. The anchor, the source of the Council's twisted power. Standing before the crystal, his hands raised as if in prayer, was the scarred high priest. He was not alone. From the shadows, a dozen wolves emerged, their fur the color of ash, their eyes burning with the same malevolent red light as the crystal. They were dark wolves, creatures of corrupted magic, bound to the priest's will. "The traitors!" the scarred priest hissed, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You should have stayed dead, Alpha Blackwell. Now, you will have the honor of watching your precious Omega's power fuel my ascension." He was channeling energy from the crystal, drawing its dark power into himself. Ronan and Lyra didn't need a plan. They moved as one, a blur of silver light and dark fury. Ronan's sword met the claws and teeth of the dark wolves, a whirlwind of steel and righteous anger. He was a bulwark, a storm of an alpha protecting his mate. Lyra moved with him, her glowing hands not a weapon, but a shield. She deflected the streams of dark energy the priest hurled at them, the silver light of her will meeting the corrupting red, a constant battle of attrition. They were magnificent, a perfect, seamless dance of offense and defense. But the priest was old and cunning. He realized he could not break Ronan's guard or penetrate Lyra's shield. So he changed his tactics. He stopped attacking them directly. Instead, he turned his full attention to the crystal, pouring his own life force into it. "If I cannot take her power," he shrieked, his body beginning to wither, "then I will give her all of mine." The crystal flared, letting out a deafening, high-pitched scream. A massive wave of pure, concentrated dark energy, raw and untamed, erupted from it. It wasn't an attack. It was a flood. It bypassed their defenses and slammed directly into Lyra. It was too much. The power was designed to overwhelm her, to shatter her mind and leave her an empty vessel. She cried out, her knees buckling, the silver light around her flickering violently as the darkness poured in. She was drowning. "Take it!" she screamed to Ronan through the bond, her mind fracturing under the strain. "Ground it!" He understood instantly. He broke off his fight with the wolves and rushed to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, pressing his body against hers. He became her anchor to the mortal world. She opened the floodgates of their bond, and the torrent of dark energy that was killing her surged into him. He roared as the power coursed through him, his muscles straining, the veins in his neck standing out like cords. But he held fast. He was an alpha of the earth, strong and solid. He could ground the corrupting energy, channeling it through his own body and harmlessly into the stone floor beneath them. They had created a circuit, a feedback loop. The priest poured his power into the crystal poured it into Lyra poured it into Ronan, and Ronan bled it into the earth. The scarred priest, realizing what was happening, screamed in fury. He poured more and more of himself into the crystal, trying to overload them. But the crystal, unable to contain the violent, chaotic feedback loop of power, began to crack. A web of fractures spread across its surface. With a final, explosive shriek, the blood crystal shattered into a million pieces of glittering black dust. The backlash was catastrophic. The wave of exploding energy threw Ronan clear across the room, but Lyra, at the epicenter, took the full, devastating force of it. Her silver light extinguished like a snuffed candle. She collapsed, limp and broken, as silence fell over the ruined chamber. Ronan scrambled to her side, his heart seizing in his chest. She was pale, still, not breathing. He saw the life fading from her eyes, a slow, terrible dimming. He had won the battle, but he was losing the war. A desperate, primal instinct took over. He bent his head, and with a guttural cry of love and defiance, he sank his teeth into the soft flesh of her shoulder, marking her, binding her fading life force to his own in a final, hopeless act of love. Chapter 23. The dawn of a new Mark Ronan held her, the silence of the destroyed temple a ringing in his ears. The dust of the shattered crystal settled around them like black snow. It was over. The corruption was gone, but the cost was too high. He pressed his ear to her chest, praying, begging to hear a sound that wasn't there. Nothing. Her heart was silent. He squeezed his eyes shut, a single hot tear tracing a path through the grime and blood on his cheek. He had failed. He had gotten her back from death once, only to lose her again. He adjusted his hold, pulling her limp form more tightly against him, preparing to sit with her until the world ended. As the first, tentative rays of dawn pierced the gloom of the underground temple through a fissure in the ceiling, a soft light began to emanate from his mark on her shoulder. It wasn't the silvery light of the moon's air. It was a gentle, golden glow, the color of his own alpha power, warm and alive. The light spread, tracing the veins in her skin, a beautiful, intricate web of gold. He watched, breathless, as the glow concentrated over her heart. He felt it then, a flutter, so faint he thought he had imagined it. He pressed his ear to her chest again, his breath hitched in his throat. And there it was, thump, thump, weak but steady. A heartbeat, her heartbeat, returning in rhythm with his own. Love does not conquer death, son of the wolf, a familiar feminine voice whispered in his soul. The goddess. It remakes it. Prophecy is a path, but love is the destination. She chose a heart, and in turn, that heart chose hers. Lyra's eyes fluttered open. They were no longer just the color of the winter moon. Flecks of pure gold now sparkled in their silvery depths. She looked at him, a slow, beautiful smile spreading across her lips. "Hi," she whispered, her voice raspy but whole. Relief, so powerful and absolute it felt like being struck by lightning, washed over Ronan. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He just lowered his head and kissed her, a kiss filled with the taste of tears and the promise of 1,000 dawns. When they finally emerged from the ruins of the Blood Temple, blinking in the bright morning sun, they found the temple courtyard in a state of quiet chaos. The guards and pack members who had remained loyal, led by Ronan's Beta Elias, had retaken Silverwood. The corrupt priests were in chains. The truth was spreading like wildfire. They saw Ronan and Lyra emerge, bruised and exhausted but alive and together. They saw the new golden mark glowing on her shoulder. They saw the shared light in their eyes, and a silence of awe fell over the crowd. One by one, from the highest-ranking Alpha warrior to the lowest-ranking Omega servant, they dropped to one knee. They were not kneeling to a prophecy. They were kneeling to a new beginning, to the undeniable power they saw in the two wolves who stood before them, not as master and servant or Alpha and Omega, but as equals. Chapter 24. I chose myself. 2 months later, the world was a different place. The High Council had been dissolved, its corrupt laws burned on a pyre in the center of Silverwood. In its place, a new council was formed, one made of representatives from all ranks, alphas, betas, and omegas, all with an equal voice. The rigid, brutal hierarchy that had governed their people for centuries was gone, replaced by a system built on mutual respect and partnership. The change was slow, and not without its challenges, but it was real. It was a future taking root. At the head of this new world stood Lyra and Ronan. She was not a Luna in the traditional sense, a silent power behind the throne. She was the first Omega Alpha, a title they had created together. Her insight, her healer's wisdom, and her profound connection to the heart of their people were her strength. Ronan stood by her side, not as her ruler, but as her partner, his strength and strategic mind the perfect complement to her own. He was the sword, and she was the hand that guided it. Their bond was the foundation upon which this new era was built. Tonight, under the light of a full, peaceful moon, they stood on the balcony of the High Temple looking down at the glowing city of Silverwood. It was truly a city of light now, its beauty no longer hiding a dark, rotten core. It was a city of hope. Lyra leaned back against Ronan's chest, his arms wrapping securely around her waist. She traced the faint, golden lines of the mark on her shoulder. It no longer pulsed with power. It was a quiet, warm reminder of their shared life. "Do you ever miss it?" Ronan murmured into her hair, his voice a low, contented rumble. "The divine power?" Lyra thought for a moment, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. She thought of the explosive, uncontrollable energy, the crushing weight of a destiny she never asked for. She thought of the loneliness. Then she thought of this, the simple, profound peace of being in his arms, the quiet strength of their shared bond, the pride in what they were building together. She smiled. "No," she said, her voice filled with a serene certainty. "Power is a lonely thing. This is everything." She turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to cup his jaw. She looked into his stormy eyes, now free of the shadows of guilt, and saw her own reflection. She saw a woman who was no longer broken or ashamed. A woman who was whole, powerful, and free. A woman who had learned that true strength wasn't about control or defiance, but about the vulnerability to love and the faith to trust in herself. The core emotional question of her life had finally been answered. Love that once destroyed her had, in the end, been the only thing that could truly heal her. Under the final, watchful gaze of the moon, she whispered the words that had become her truth, her mantra, the final, perfect resolution to her story. "He rejected me once, but love chose me twice." She leaned in and kissed him, a soft, promising kiss filled with a future of their own making. "And this time," she finished against his lips, "I chose myself too."